Hello, in today's tutorial we'll be taking a quick look over an existing sales order, the features that are available within it, if we need to edit anything, and the general flow that you would use to manipulate a sales order to allow it to pass through Receta. We'll take it as read that you've previously looked at some of the videos detailing how we'd add sales orders onto the system and quotations, etc. And so I'll dive straight in. As you can see, I'm on a sales order already that I've previously added in one of the other videos. If we look on the left hand side, we have some key areas here I would like to discuss. The first section here relates to the overall status of the sales order. The overall status is dictated by this drop down here. The status is automatically set to pending for a brand new sales order. If we click this, we can see that we have some additional statuses which we can set. These can either be set manually or, depending upon other actions that you perform against this sales order, will be updated again automatically. If, when this sales order is first created, the particular customer in question has been set to be on a pro forma payment basis, then a pro forma would automatically be generated for this sales order, automatically emailed to this customer, and the status of this sales order would have a status of pro forma pending payment. All of this would be done automatically and the customer will have received their invoice. When the customer makes your accounts clerks aware that they have paid the invoice and the accounts clerks confirm it, the individual accounts clerk would come into this sales order, or indeed go into the pro forma invoice, which will be displayed here, and click the button to say that the customer had paid this pro forma invoice. This would add a note to here to show that the pro forma had been set as paid and on what particular date, and it would automatically release this sales order from that section. It should be noted that when any sales order has a status of pro forma pending payment, a lot of the extra features in the button shown here will not be available. One of the other fields here is processing. Whenever you've performed any other action other than first putting the sales order on, or if it's on a pro forma, paying the pro forma, any other action such as productions to do with individual lines, adding notes, etc. will shift the overall status of the sales order to have a status of processing. That lets the system know that there's something happening with it. It doesn't say what's happening with it, it's just that there's something happening with it. The final status to be aware of is complete. When every single individual item in the sales order has their own status of CPROD produced, which I'll get to in a short while, it will automatically update the overall sales order to show as complete. When this happens, Receta now knows that the sales order is finished and dealt with and can be put into the archives. In some cases, you may wish to artificially set this sales order as complete. Let's say, for example, you have a requirement from the customer for 100 items, but you can only supply the customer with 80. You would supply them with 80, and then this would still show an outstanding amount of 20 to be sent, but the customer then agrees that they no longer wish to have those other 20. In order to finish off the sales order, you could then manually go and set the status to complete, and possibly choose to add a note to say why that was done. If we scroll down, each item in blue with the following block underneath designates one item in this sales order. In this case, this sales order only has one item in it. You may have several. From top to bottom, we have requirement, which is the customer's initial request for items. In this case, they wish to have 100. How many of that finished CPROD we already have in stock is shown here. We have 0. And how many are outstanding? By that, it means how many of you still got left to send for this customer. If you did a part dispatch, for example, of 50 of these, the part dispatch would be shown and the remaining 50 would be shown here. If we're not sure about this CPROD, you can click here to go through and see the CPROD, and various information is shown here such as the profit per line, the cost per unit, profit per unit, etc. Again, if you're not sure about any of these, please watch some of the other videos detailing quotations, as it's very, very similar. One of the key differences between a quotation and a sales order is the addition of these extra blocks to aid the progression of a sales order through the system. The first one being the status. As with the main status of a sales order, each line has its own status, shown here. You can update these manually in the same way you can do the main one, and I'll go through these in turn, or depending upon certain actions that you perform here, this status will be updated automatically as well. If you update the status automatically, then notifications are sent around. However, if you choose to do it manually, you can then elect as to whether or not the people who would normally be notified, depending upon the admin defaults you'd set, if you choose to let them know that you've manually updated this status. And you can do this on a per status update basis by ticking or unticking this box as required. If we take a brief look at these statuses, pending is very straightforward. Pending means that there's nothing happened to this line as it stands. Awaiting FP ingredients is exactly as it's suggested. Something in this cProd's FP, so it's capsule or tablet, we're waiting on an ingredient coming in. That could be the capsule shell, but will be more likely be a specific powder ingredient that we're waiting coming in. cProd materials, if we're waiting on a particular lid, or a bottle, or a box, or a container coming into stock, we'd set that to status there. If we're waiting for both types coming in, we'd set that there. If we're waiting on artwork labels to come in, that's not the specific label in terms of its actual physical label, it's the artwork for the label. If we don't have that on file, we could set that status there. If we've set a production against this item for the FP, we can set it as awaiting FP production, and if we've set a cProd production for this item, we'd set it as awaiting cProd production. When the items are running and actually going through production, the statuses will automatically update to FP in production or cProd in production, and when they are complete, they would automatically update to FP produced, cProd produced. All of these can be set manually or, as I say, when you're doing certain tasks. One of the key statuses to be aware of is the cProd produced. Whenever a production for this particular cProd is finished and a stock level is then automatically added, the status of this will then automatically shift to be shown as cProd produced. Or again, you could set it manually if you wish. Whenever the line has a status of cProd produced and has a stock level, then this particular line and the associated sales order would then appear automatically in the dispatch area. Without both those two features being in place, this particular line would not appear in the dispatch area. So just to reiterate, this particular line would need to have a stock level showing against it for the finished cProd and a status of cProd produced in order for it to show. I hope that's clear. If we now look at some of the other features. Generally, when adding a sales order, the first thing that you'd want to do after that point is see if you have the materials in store to make it. So first of all, we would check if we have the cProd materials in stock by clicking that button. Here we can see the constituent parts of the cProd, and we can see some of the information in front of us. This column shows us what we have in stock for these particular items. This shows us what we would use to produce what was left outstanding against this particular line. This shows other usage of these particular items which has been planned on our planner but is yet to be allocated. This shows us other usage which is planned and allocated. This shows us unplanned usage, so that is other sales orders which are also going to use this item but have yet to be planned on the planner. And therefore this item shows us the overall remaining. This takes into account all of these possible usages to give us a final figure, so we can then know what we need to purchase. And you can pass that figure to your purchasing operators. Alternatively, your purchase operators can use this page themselves. Finally, when you look at this field here, you can then offset that with this field, and this is what is actually on purchase already, or in the case of an FP, on production. So we're going to make these. So as we can see here, we've got almost 109,000 short of what we have in stock, which is 0, but we've actually got 102,000 ready to be purchased. So really our difference is that 7,500 shown there. If we want to download any of this into a CSV for use in Excel for manipulation, you can do by clicking this button here. As with the cProd materials stock, we can also check the FP ingredients of this cProd by clicking here. The fields and columns are exactly the same and shown in the same way. When we are satisfied that we have the items in stock and we wish to add this to production, or even in advance of them having in stock, we can click one of these two buttons here. If we know we need to make an FP production for this, we can click and go through. It automatically pre-populates the FP in question. We can add start and end dates. The units we wish to make is automatically calculated for us. If we wanted to just double check the stock levels, we can check it here and it tells us if we're short of anything, but likelihood is we'll already know that based upon the tools I've just previously shown. If when making an FP you also wish to make the associated rec to go with it, which in most cases you would because the rec is the powder mix, you would click this button here and it would automatically add the associated rec to go alongside the FP mix. Finally, if as part of this sales order this particular production will update the ETA that you're providing to the customer, you can select to add an ETA to this line. So let's say that this sales order came on file today. You add a production of this FP for 3 days time. Therefore you know, for example, that will mean that you cannot dispatch this item probably for another week. You can click here, select the likely ETA now based upon what you've just put in, and then select to either update the customer and send it to the customer, or choose not to and it will just simply be added. If you set this to yes, as well as updating it on the sales order, the customer will get a notification of the ETA being automatically changed. This is very useful when it comes to keeping your customers informed of their likely dispatch date without them needing to call you to find that information out. The same applies to CPROD scheduling. If for whatever reason you wish to add a manual ETA, irrespective of whether or not you're doing productions, you can choose to do that here and again choose whether or not you notify the customer of this ETA. In some cases you may have the ability to print your labels to go with this particular CPROD in-house or choose to outsource them. If you wish to keep a note of which items you are choosing to outsource or which items you are choosing to print internally, you can set them on a per basis here. Don't worry if you don't have those features in your premises, you can safely ignore this section. One section which some people do get confused with, but I'll do my best to explain it now, is the usage helper. When doing your stock checks here, there may be an occasion where you want the usage that may apply to this one not to carry over into other usages, and by that I'll give you an example. If we checked here, we can see that another sales order has some usage planned for this formula of 7,500. So every time we looked at another sales order which also used this formula, we would see this here until the sales order which was using this was then gone into planned. But let's say there's a scenario where you want to safely ignore that 7,500. You don't need to know about it. It may be that you're not planning on producing it. It's just going to be sitting on file for a while, etc. What you can do is in that particular sales order, you can click that button to ignore the FP requirements. It's only used very infrequently. However, it does sometimes help with stock management and purchase planning. Finally, if you're ever not sure what's in this particular CPROD, you can click the spec sheet and formulation sheet as standard to see the information within it. Scroll down, you can see the profit margins, etc. as standard, and if we need to edit this sales order, you can click here and edit it in much the same way you can add it. 2 key points. One, if you're not sure how you add a sales order, please look at one of the other videos in the help section. The editing is exactly the same. However, one other point to keep in mind, all of the statuses in the main will be revised and it will warn you if it's going to change the statuses when you edit it. In some cases, editing a sales order is almost like starting it again. In some cases, it may be the best option if you haven't yet made any productions against this item. Down the right hand side, we have some other key information which may be of note. Critical notes. If you add a critical note against this sales order, this information is displayed throughout the sales order's lifespan. It is also displayed in other areas of Receta which are referencing the sales order. For example, on the dispatch page, whenever any of these items appear in the dispatch page because they're ready to be dispatched, these critical notes will come with this item so that your dispatch team can be aware of what needs to be done. It could be that you add a critical note for how the items need to be packed. You could add a critical note for certain production staff that need to be aware of how the items need to be dated, for example. It would be unique to this sales order, not necessarily for an individual CPROD, which you can set production warnings for independently anyway. General notes and logs. As with lots of sections in Receta, a general note and log is kept of every action performed against a sales order, which you can add to on demand as well. Most of this will be automatic, and it simply serves so we can see the full trace of who did what with the sales order. Linked productions. When any of the CPROD or FP or REC against this item are put into production or planned, they will appear here so you can easily see what's planned against the item. Pro forma invoices. As previously explained, if the customer is on a pro forma setup and when this sales order is created, a pro forma would automatically be created alongside it and stored here. You can also find this within the invoices section if you wish. Linked invoices. When an item is dispatched from this particular sales order, an automatic invoice would be created. Now, in the case of a pro forma, if for example the customer is set to pay 50% upfront, then the linked invoices would take note of that, and the invoices generated would be aware of that 50% which had already been prepaid, and the invoice will be automatically amended to suit. However, you can get to them automatically here should you wish. Any of the dispatches which have been created against the sales order are shown here. Any linked purchase orders are shown here. When you make a purchase order, if it is on the back of a shortage of stock, your purchase manager can elect to link the purchase order to one or more sales orders, so you can easily see which purchase order is related to a particular sales order. Finally, if when the customer provides their order in email form, they may well also provide as a PDF purchase order, for example, you can upload that here against the file for your reference should you wish. That concludes the manipulation and editing of sales orders. I hope you've enjoyed the video.